Welcome back to the Baits and Stars. I'm your host, V. Paul Jambazian, and I feel like it's been a month since the last episode. A virus hit our entire household, so we had to lay low for a bit. But I'm finally back with a great guest. He's one of my favorite drummers and artists. He is founding member of influential Rhode Island indie rock band Throwing Muses. He is, of course, Dave Narcizo. We get into growing up in Newport, the formation of Throwing Muses, signing to 4AD, the Boston scene, the late great Gary Smith, and much, much more. Here's my conversation with Dave Narcizo. How's your morning going so far?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's cold.
Yeah, it's cold down here too.
Yeah. I walk to a coffee place and my hands are usually like completely frozen. I drink iced coffee all year and it's just like it's completely frozen by the time I get at home.
Same. Yeah. I mean, at home, I drink hot coffee, but when I'm out and about, it's just so much more convenient to get a iced coffee.
Yep.
Yeah. Especially if you're driving or running around.
Yeah.
The hot's not the most practical.
No, I don't like when the hot gets cold.
Yeah, exactly. There's no
cut to the chase.
Just spice it. Done. Yeah. Let's start in Newport because that's where you grew up.
Yeah. Born and raised. Lived in Boston right before the Muses got signed. We lived in Boston for a couple of years.
That's right. Yeah.
And then I lived in Carroll Gardens in Brooklyn for a couple of years.
I didn't know that.
And then came back to Newport. Yeah. Right after Real Ramona, I moved to Brooklyn and then came back a couple of years later.
Interesting. I feel like a lot of people did that at that time.
Yeah, it was a very different. Carroll Gardens was very different back then.
My framing of Brooklyn is still like the late 90s, early aughts. So it was probably even different. Early 90s are probably even more different.
Yeah. Well, this would have been 90, 91.
Yeah.
93. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
So grew up here. Kristen and Tanya grew up here. We met in elementary school.
My framing of Newport is the jazz festival and like a couple of hardcore bands. But other than that, like I don't,
That's funny. Yeah, it's interesting because most people's perspective on it is it's a sailing resort town.
Okay.
It was the sort of vacation spot during the Gilded Age.
Yeah.
So it's got all these Gilded Age mansions. But we grew up, working class, public school, which has a pretty like sizable population of that. And it's on an island. It's a beautiful place and it's small. So you can get yourself, no matter how crowded, and it's these days, it's really trying to be another Hamptons. But you can get by the ocean and have not a single soul around. Really easily, just walk, you just know which paths to take and to avoid the crowds. So it's a beautiful place. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure that I thought I would end up living here sort of permanently in my adult life. I don't think I necessarily wanted to. And then when I did, it's kind of flipped that perspective. It became, I really loved the just super familiarity of the whole thing.
Nice.
My son went through basically all the same school systems I did. And it was, and now it's changed a lot. There's a lot more going on. It's a little bit more culturally like just richer than it was kind of a one note blue blazer topsider sailing community when I was growing up.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
When it comes to Rhode Island, my only point of reference is Cranston and Providence. I would say Boston too. I'm Armenian, so we had a lot of family, friends, and relatives all throughout Providence and Boston. So, but other than that, like I'm not very familiar with.
Well, it's funny you referenced the folk and jazz festivals and the hardcore scene. Like Muses came up like in high school. There was a pretty thriving hardcore scene all around us. But folk and jazz, what's interesting about that is, those festivals would happen.
Yeah.
Nothing was happening in the town. I remember like I had a summer job working in a parking lot. I was a parking lot attendant. And I remember people like coming up after having been to the festival and going, where can we go see more jazz or where can we go see more music? And
sure.
There was one club that was actually really, really cool, but it was, like Johnny Thunders and the Dead Boys. And, like it was like a rock club. And I was like, I don't necessarily want to go there. These jazz fans.
Jazz heads. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's changed a little bit. But like for us, it was the hardcore scene, but like, again, we were all in high school. And so we'd play parties and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure if there was much of a scene out. They had more of a scene, than we weren't really part of a scene. And then we started playing in Providence. And then that was, that felt more.
That sort of became your forum. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Muses, though, it starts with Tanya and Kristen, obviously. Yes. Yeah. And they were super young, right, when they started?
Yeah. So I had known them since, I think we met in the 4th grade. And when we were in high school, I was in concert marching bands. And I was practicing for an all-state recital. And they had these practice.
I remember those days.
Yeah. They had these practice rooms in the off the auditorium in our high school, and I was in there practicing, and I could hear someone playing piano, and it caught my ear, and I peeked in the door, and it was Kristen, and that's when I found out that they had a band. She and Tanya, a girl named Elaine Adamides, and this girl Becca Blumen, and they had a band. It was called the Muses. And so I went to go see them. They played at the Newport Art Museum, and I went to go see them, and it was great. The early stuff, which I ended up, I'll get to that later, but I had them play at a party at my house when my parents were away.
Sweet.
And then one night, Kristen just called me and she said, "Hey, we booked a demo that's tomorrow," and Becca just quit. And so she asked if I would fill in, and I'd never played a drum kit before. So I borrowed a drum kit from a drummer from one of the local hardcore bands, but he had lent his cymbals out to somebody else. So I only got the kit, but I'd never played a kit before. So I didn't really mind that there weren't cymbals. And then that kind of became accidentally a signature. Yeah. But then I did it, and I loved the songs, and I was like, I'm gonna stick with this. And at that time, they would write on Casio keyboard. So whoever's song it was would play the Casio keyboard, and then they would move around all the time, like the three of them between guitar, bass, and keyboards. And it was very very new wave, like new wave pop.
Okay.
Very poppy. And then it was like, I think we were juniors in high school at that time. And then like in our senior year was when Kristen started bringing in, all of a sudden she started writing everything on guitar. And she came to practice with like Hate My Way and Vicky Stocks and things like that had like, she wrote all those songs kind of in one big fell swoop. And so there was this big shift happened. And the Casio sort of faded out of view.
And I assume that's when like the sound became more rock, for lack of a better word.
Much more guitar.
Driven. Yeah.
And then they both started writing on guitar. So it was, and then that was at that point that Elaine left. Once we graduated high school, and I went to Providence College, and Elaine went off to college, and she left the band. Mm-hmm. And then we found Leslie Langston was living in Newport at the time. And I don't even know how Kristen found her, but I remember we all went to go ask her to play with us, and she was working in some restaurant or something. Then they became that lineup of that was the first few records. And we would play, at that point, we had met Gary Smith and his band. We had played some shows with them at a club in Newport called the Blue Pelican.
And what was his band called?
Lifeboat.
Lifeboat, that's right. Yeah.
Yep. So he encouraged us to start playing in Boston. So when I was at PC, pretty much every weekend I would grab all the equipment from Newport and drive up to Boston, and we would play shows in Boston like every weekend. And it was basically by the end of that year, we decided, all right, I told my parents, I'm going to not go back to school, and I'm going to just do this and see what happens. So we moved to Boston, and then we got signed to 4AD, I think within the year. And they had never signed an American band before.
Right.
Ivo, who runs the label, had contacted our manager and said, look, I'm really interested in this, but we don't work with American bands, but just keep me in the loop. And then that conversation went on for a little while. And finally he said, let's just do one record. And our deal with 4AD throughout our entire history with them was always record to record. And then Warner Brothers, that happened a year later.
Yeah. Sire, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What album would that have been?
House Tornado.
Yeah,
the second one. So Gil Norton did the first album. The 4AD connected us with Gil Norton to produce the first record. We recorded it at Longview in Massachusetts. And then I went to Liverpool to mix it. And then after that was done, we went over and played 3 shows with the Cocteau Twins, and we played our own show at this tiny club in Covent Garden, actually. And we recorded an EP called Change Changed. And then 4AD was putting out a compilation called, there was a song we had called Fish, which was already a song, and it didn't end up on the first album, but Ivo really liked it and wanted us to build an EP around it. And then he took a lyric from it, and there was a 4AD compilation that came out that he took a lyric from, Lonely as an Eyesore. And then, so we went over and recorded. So after those shows, we went to Blackwing and recorded that EP with Gil.
With Gil.
But then that was the last thing we did with Gil.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't, I've always read things about Gil Norton not being the easiest producer always.
I love Gil. Like, he's one of my favorite people. Yeah. And I learned a lot from him.
Yeah.
I mentioned not playing cymbals, and when we sat down to do pre-production for the first album, he wasn't having the no cymbals thing. And, we were really young. We were like 18, 19, and we just defined ourselves as a live band. We weren't one of those bands that really embraced the recording process and really got into it and, wanted to play with it and figure it out. And we were just wanted somebody to take a picture of what we were doing. And that was it. And he worked on Echo and the Bunnymen records and, Icicle Works and all that stuff. So he'd come from like big production world. And so first thing he did was he was just like, no, you're going to overdub all the cymbals. So we were just super compliant the whole time. We were like, okay, we'll do that. And then, but he did teach me a lot because I had come from concert drums and marching drums.
Very percussive.
So it was all my hands. My foot would just be keeping time. And he'd sit with me and say, you can divide up some of this work. You can do some of these things. It was a real, for me, it was a really great, a class, because he had me overdub all the hi-hat parts even. So I had to play all my parts without the hi-hat. I almost in my memory, and I could be making this up. Maybe this is my imagination. I feel like he had me deconstruct some parts, right down to separate drums. So it was a great exercise, for me as a drummer, to kind of learn how to do all that. But when I went over to Liverpool to mix it, I remember walking into the studio, literally just gotten off the train. I put my bags down and I could hear Hate My Way playing in the control room with the whole band taken out and just strings. Something that now I probably would love.
Right.
But back to that idea of our identity was just 100% about what we were when we sat down and played, and we just wanted somebody to take a picture of that. Yeah. So he and I would have, I remember just thinking I really love Gil, but we are not going to be friends at the end of this. we would get into so many arguments, and the arguments would always end in the same place, which was, I would say to him, it should sound amateur. And he would say, that's just because you're amateur is the only reason why you want that. And I remember once it was done, I took it back to London and played it for Ivo. I remember he didn't say a word for a really long time. And finally he said, I just didn't think you'd be here now. I thought this would be maybe 3 records down the road.
Interesting.
Yeah, because he had, he only knew the demos, and
Sure.
the demos were very raw. We had recorded the demos with Gary. So it was like, we've all had a difficult time making friends with that record. It's not like I think any of us listened to our stuff a whole lot, but that one always felt like a photograph where somebody put too much makeup on us. And so then what happened was we went back to London and recorded that EP. Everything he said in that session, we'd be like, no. And so he was on to us. And so he flew to Newport and sat down with us to talk about the next album. And he said, I'm only going to do it if I have final veto on all decisions. So we said no.
That was it for you guys.
And then that was it.
Yeah.
And, obviously we stayed friends. And
Sure.
I did have a conversation with him many years later.
Mm-hmm.
This is just my ego talking, where he said, I get what you were going for now. I see why you wanted to do that. Because he went on to, produce the Pixies and Foo Fighters,
right?
Very like rock records.
Yeah.
Whereas ours, everything has a shh to it and a sparkle. And I think eventually he came back and he goes, okay, yeah, I see where you were going, which wasn't an idea necessarily. It was more just kind of like an effort to preserve what it sounded like in the room.
You weren't wrong necessarily, and he wasn't wrong.
No, 100%. Like I said, I'd love to hear that version of Hate My Way now. Like now I'd be like, oh, I bet that was really cool.
Yeah.
But at the time, we were extreme purists.
Sure.
We only liked like 3 or 4 bands, and we did what we did. And
wasn't that sort of the vibe with a lot of your peers?
I think so. Yeah. But I feel like everybody else loved all the bands that everyone loved at that time. That for me, it wasn't till years later that I appreciated. Like everybody loved The Cure, and everybody loved the Smiths, and everybody loved Echo and the Bunnymen, and we had no interest in any of that. It was all too polished and too produced for us. Years later, I gained an appreciation for it. I went back and I was like, oh, okay, now I see these are brilliant. Like I love these records. But at the time, it was very much like just what we did. And then we loved X, we loved Violent Femmes, Velvet Underground, REM,
obviously, yeah.
Husker Du. So that was kind of it. Yeah. And that was kind of it. So in some ways, I think to answer your question, like it didn't seem like everybody else was in that. Like it seemed like everybody else loved all these things that we didn't love.
Interesting.
And again, not in a right or wrong kind of way, because I did open my eyes and ears and actually go, oh, there's really incredible stuff happening out there besides these 4 bands.
Gotcha. No, I just mean like when I listen to like early Lemonheads or early Dinosaur, there's a rawness that the later albums don't always have.
Yeah. The Boston scene was funny because we were still underage.
Sure.
So we couldn't go see anybody else. So we only saw whoever we played with. And we were also not like the Lemonheads and not like Dinosaur Jr. and there was nothing that traditional about us.
Sure.
I remember somebody saying to Gary once, coming to see us at the Rat, and this is kind of ironic because he said to Gary, I think this is the only band I've seen that doesn't seem to have been influenced by the Beatles at all, which is funny because Kristen and Tanya are massive
Right,
fans.
I was going to say.
Yeah, but I get I see what he meant, because we just didn't sound like any of those other bands.
No.
So I think
There was definitely a classic rock influence with, whether it's Neil Young or whatever. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And I feel like what happened was we got a lot of attention because, I guess on one side, I would like to say because of the quality of what we were doing, but also because it was a spectacle. I mean, it really was. Sure. I think Kristen was a spectacle. Like it was, I think people were, this woman screaming and crazy time signatures and time change.
Time pushing and pulling and.
Yeah. So I think it got us a lot of attention. And I always felt like most of the Boston scene didn't like us. And part of it because of the attention that we got.
Oh,
and you'd hear a lot of like, well, I don't get it. There was a lot of that. It was, and honestly, to be honest, that continued for years. Like when we left Boston, when we were just touring nationally and internationally, when those Boston shows would come, we would not look forward to them, because it was mostly people crossed-armed in the audience going, yeah, I don't get it. Providence was the same way. Like, was
it mainly the scene that felt that way, or you felt that from some of your peers too?
I don't know if I ever really articulated that. Like what we always just felt like those hometown audiences were always, you had to prove yourself so much to them. They weren't going to give you the benefit of the doubt, like, which I guess is fair,
sure.
But I think probably to your point, yeah, I'm sure there was definitely a sentiment in certain corners of the scene that, especially because, like I said, a lot of those bands were sort of riffing on more traditional stuff, more Neil Young kind of. And so we must have just seemed bizarre art rock. Yeah. And so I think they were probably like, I don't get it. I don't understand why they're getting attention. So we always kind of felt that way with hometown shows. I feel like eventually that changed. But there was a good long period of time where it was always like, you'd play in all these places and you'd have these really enthusiastic, fun crowds. And then you go back to Boston and everyone would just sort of stand there and look at you.
I remember, because I'm friendly with John Strum. We had met years ago. Last couple of years, he posts things from their past on his social media. And he posted a flyer when Blake Babies had played with Throwing Muses, and he was talking about how stoked they were.
I remember. Yeah. Well, I think even though I think they were a little more straightforward than us, we did feel a kinship with them. We played with them a few times, I think. And Gary had already found them.
Yeah.
So they kind of came in under his umbrella for us. They felt like part of our circle.
Because they had very interesting songs, and they definitely had new wave influence too.
Yes.
On a lot of those albums. So
yeah.
Because I always felt like you were maybe like the big brothers and sisters in some way, or maybe later on that sentiment happened, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
It's funny. I would only put them in that category maybe as feeling like an older sibling because we always felt younger than everybody else. And, and again, we were in Boston for 2 years and then got signed to 4AD and then got signed to Warner Brothers. And then I went back to Newport, and Kristen was in Newport, and Tanya stayed in Boston. But like, I don't feel like we ever really fully felt part of the scene. Tanya has a lot more experience with it because she stayed, and she did get to know a lot of those bands. And yeah, she was just exposed to them more than we were. Like I was still, I'm trying to think when did I turn 21? So 1987. So our first album had already come out.
Right.
And we'd already toured it, and we still weren't 21. So I wasn't going to see anybody.
Right. Okay.
And she managed to get in. She was dating somebody. She was living with somebody, I think, or they were living together at the time, who was in a Boston band. And she ended up getting into a lot of shows. But so she just knew that scene way more than Kristen and I did. I mean, Kristen definitely not, because Kristen didn't even live with us in Boston. She was in Newport. She had already had her first son.
That's right. Yeah.
And so she was in Newport with the baby. She'd come up for shows.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that Throwing Muses, maybe just out of happenstance, broke more in London, UK first? Or is that just because of 4AD and the press there?
I think yes. But I think it also is what you said after that. It's like that country is small, and they, at that time when our first record came out, there were 3 major weekly music magazines. It was Sounds, NME, and Melody Maker.
Melody Maker, right?
Yeah. And when our first album came out, Melody Maker put us on the cover. And so it was like,
and over there, that's like Time magazine, because it's on like it's like on
it's in every single newsstand, and it's So oddly, it's like on the one hand, it was remarkable to be like, wow, we got put on this national music magazine
publication, yeah.
But in another way, it was sort of like commonplace. They would do that kind of stuff all the time. I remember when Hunk Papa Tour, the Sundays opened up, and I remember them saying, and they didn't have an album out yet. They had only released a single, and then 4AD introduced us to them and said, we're thinking of these guys to go out on your next tour. And I remember them saying that either Melody Maker or NME wanted to put them on the cover, and they said no. But they were going to put them on the cover without an album. They hadn't even released their first album yet.
Super interesting.
And it was, and to go off on a little side tangent on that too, we had some interesting conversations with them about the difference between the way English audiences treated American bands at that time as opposed to their own. Because they were saying that they were much more forgiving of American bands. We had done, I don't know if it was that record. I think this was a conversation I had with them later. One of our records came out. Can't remember what it was. And HMV or whatever the big record store was there, Virgin, they had done these, they'd put the album artwork on a shopping bag. So everybody who shopped there would leave with a shopping bag that had our album cover on it. And I remember Harriet saying, we would be crucified if we did that. Like English people would completely harshly judge us for doing that. But because you're an American band, you're going to be able to get away with it.
Wow.
So anyway, so I digress, but so I think in some way, and the first album also was only ever released over there. It was never officially released in the United States ever. It was an import. So yeah, I think it did have, we did have a bit of a higher profile, but then it sort of kind of started to match certain territories in the States. There were just certain areas where we did well. New York, obviously Boston, Chicago, Minneapolis, LA, Seattle, San Francisco. There would be these places where you'd go, and it was kind of comparable to playing a show in London or somewhere in England. Yeah, because the only national magazine in the States for music at that time was Rolling Stone.
That's true. So, yeah, I'm trying to think. No,
Rolling Stone wasn't going to put anybody on the cover who didn't have an album or who nobody knew.
Right. Yeah, there was much more of a platform and avenue for American independent artists in the UK.
Yeah, and also
at that time, I feel like
that was still, we sort of predate. There was pirate radio going on when we first started, but we predate a lot of the sort of post BBC One, BBC Two, BBC Three. So when the thing about that culture at that time, especially that I always thought was interesting and kind of explained about their collective knowledge of music, is that we'd be played on the same radio station that classical music would be played on. You'd have these grandmothers with BBC radio on, and they'd hear all this stuff. And so there was like
there's a lot of mixed formatting.
Yeah. And I think you combine that with pub culture, which was a multi-generational socializing, which we didn't have in our country. I mean, I think maybe have it a little bit more now, but bars in Newport for sure. And then even bars in Boston, you didn't get multi-generations so much as that pub culture. So there was this, everyone seemed to be really worldly. They just knew certainly politically, they knew a lot more about things that were happening, certainly east of us, that we didn't know as much. I'll say just us,
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Other people in our generation did. But
from that point, just backtracking a bit, you had essentially severed things with Gil Norton, right?
When we said no to the veto, we had Gary do
that. I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah. And Warner Brothers just asked us to do one. The first track on that album is called Colder. And so they had us just do that one song and send it to them. And then they said that was fine.
Just to basically feel things out.
Yeah. So he did that one and the next one.
That's right. Yeah. I think he did the next two, right?
Well, he did Hunk Papa. Yeah. But I'm trying to figure out where Fat Skier falls in this. So we did an EP called Fat Skier.
Did it come out sort of like in tandem or right after, or?
It came out before House Tornado, because I remember Warner Brothers saying to us, because they didn't love a lot of what we did, but they didn't love House Tornado. And I remember they were trying to push us to think more about production and asking us, like, who do you like and what records do you like? And so we kind of listened to a bunch of stuff that we loved, and it was educational for us too, because when we started to listen to records that way, we started realizing that records we loved weren't actually well produced.
Always great sounding.
Yeah. So we were like, oh, okay, I guess, I don't know. But we did love the way the Violent Femmes records sounded. Mm-hmm. So we had Mark Van Hecke do that EP, Fat Skier, and then none of them liked it.
Okay.
Warner Brothers didn't like it. Ivo didn't like it. He was like, no, it sounds like a demo. Because Mark was very no frills. We went from a lot of hands-on to no hands-on at all. And we had been, introduced to production through somebody who was very hands-on. And so when we sat down to do pre-production with him, I remember I had a drum part for this song called Guru de Larme. It was very old school me, very just percussion.
A lot of rudiments and...
Yeah, a lot of rudiments, a lot of roughs and paradiddles. And I remember thinking, the producer's going to listen to it and go, what you should do is this and you should do that. And I remember him just going, nope, that's fine. And I was like, wait, aren't you going to fix this? Isn't this like really lame? But then I did appreciate it too. I was like, well, that's kind of cool. He's like, no, I want them to just be what they are.
Just capture what they're doing. Yeah.
I love it now, but I do remember sharing a little bit of the way Ivo felt. Like I do remember kind of waiting for it to blossom on the production side of things. And I was like, so it still kind of sounds like a demo. But I mean, now I love that. But so then after that, we went back to Gary.
How was it working with Gary? Because he's a very sort of particular producer, right? In terms of what he likes and what he wants to accomplish, correct?
He's a bit between the original experience with Gil and Mark Van Hecke. Because he does, the thing about Gary that I think we very much appreciated was that he was trying to accurately take a picture of what we were doing. But he did have one foot in the Gil Norton world. And so he was more into production. And I think that House Tornado was very no frills. And then Hunk Papa maybe went a little too far in some of the cleaning up of things.
Now that we're on the topic of Gary, any memories of, because we lost Gary not that long ago.
He was an incredibly important person in my life. He changed my life in a lot of ways. I had never met anybody like him. And he's somebody that to a fault would push you and challenge you. Gary would never allow you to say anything without going, really? Why? Why do you think that? He would challenge you to support every stance you took. I remember this one time, because around Hunk Papa was when I started to try to figure out how to be a real drummer, learn things. And like, I started to gain an appreciation for drummers that were invisible. And a lot of the stuff I had done up to then was, again, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. And I would follow Kristen's leads a lot, and I wouldn't really pay attention to what the bass was doing. And so my parts were very out front.
I think it added to the dynamics of those songs.
100%.
It became a very distinct thing.
If I could, I would love to be able to go back to that brain. I really would, because then I went really far in the other direction, and it started at Hunk Papa, where I just started like, well, I'm going to learn some things and learn to like sit back and learn to just keep a lower profile. I mean, there are a couple of things on that record that aren't like that at all.
Yeah.
But that's where I was starting to learn that. And there was like I said, the kick drum was the slowest, and to this day, still the slowest thing to get up to speed, because it's just something I never had to use in marching drums. And we were doing this one song that started with it just basically started with a double kick beat. It was just, and then it goes into the song. And I didn't really know how to do a double kick beat. And I was trying, and this is a long-winded way of getting back to talking about Barry Smith. I remember him coming over, and I was just trying. And he comes out of the control room, and he comes over the drum kit, and he goes, yeah, don't knock yourself out. I mean, we'll just use a drum machine. We're going to go get dinner. And it was just, it put a fire in me. And he was definitely one of those people. He'd challenge you all the time. And, totally became something that I annoyed the fuck out of me years later, but still love him. He is an indelible part of our story, without a doubt. I mean, encouraging us to go to Boston, doing the demo tape with us, and just championing us everywhere. Yeah, he's a special guy.
Yeah. No, I get that feeling.
He was tough. And I think I think anybody you talk to who knew him well will have an equal amount of stories where they just talk about being frustrated with him.
And very opinionated, right?
Yes. Yeah. Very, very. And just tough. If you were going to go see him and you brought somebody with you that he'd never met, I mean, I would spare people that sometimes. Like I would go, ooh, no, I'm not going to, because he'd rake them over the coals. He like, all they would have to do would be say one thing. The classic, I think anyone who knows Gary will recognize this. He'd be like, that really? He would just like, and this would be a person he didn't even know in a room full of people. And then he would just like hold their feet to the fire and really put them on the spot. And once he'd get past that, then it would be fine. But there were times definitely I would be like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna, you maybe not want to come to this, because he was tough that way.
I feel like Gary Smith is sort of the hinge between what Throwing Muses ended up becoming and then what you were prior to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, if you have to add to that as well, Fort Apache, right? Because Fort Apache just put us in a scene.
Yeah.
That scene that I talked about where we weren't necessarily getting to see all these other bands, but everybody recorded at Fort Apache. So
even Radiohead recorded at Fort Apache.
Yeah, well, Radiohead came to Fort Apache because of what was going on there.
Yeah.
And they would have these parties. They would have these Christmas parties, and everyone would play. Like you'd go and everybody would be there, and then there'd be gear set up, and then everyone would get up and play. So like each band would get up and play like 2 or 3 songs. That and London were the 2 places that felt like most like being part of a scene was Fort Apache.
That was Dave Narciso. Very grateful for him for coming on. I will have him back very soon for a part 2 to continue the story of Throwing Muses. The Basins for Stars is a Caspian Seal production. Intro and outro music by yours truly. Background music by Hitslab. Follow the pod at your preferred streaming service. I'll hopefully see you all next week.